Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to jump into a topic that, well, gets a lot of people thinking. Making money, getting rich.
Yeah, but maybe not in the way you usually hear about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This isn't going to be your standard 5 steps to millions sort of thing. We're actually looking at a source that really takes apart some of that common advice.
hmm The kind you see everywhere online from, the gurus.
Right. So we've got this YouTube video. It's called Want to Be Rich, Don't Watch Online Gurus.
Pretty direct title.
Yeah,
And it definitely lives up to it. It argues against a lot of the conventional wisdom.
totally. So our mission here is to unpack what this video calls its anti-guru formula for wealth.
Yeah, we want to figure out what are its main points, and maybe more importantly, why does it challenge the stuff we hear all the time?
Because the source basically says, look, a lot of these popular sayings about success, they might feel good,
Uh-huh. Feel inspiring.
but they could actually be holding you back. The video suggests, maybe the people giving this advice didn't get rich that way themselves, or maybe they're not rich at all.
Oof. Yeah, it's questioning the source of the advice, fundamentally.
So instead, it lays out this 5-step anti-guru formula, a different way to think about it,
Okay, let's get into it. Step one really goes after a big one.
which is,
The classic, follow your passion.
oh, wow, okay. But isn't that like the cornerstone of everything? Do what you love. Why is that supposedly bad advice for getting wealthy?
Well, the source has a few problems with it. First, they say the word passion itself is it's too fuzzy, too vague.
Vague how?
They point to the dictionary definition, a strong and barely controllable emotion. How do you build a solid career on something barely controllable? It's hard to tell if it's a real path or just, a passing fancy.
Okay, so it's not practical, hard to pin down.
That's the idea. Second, and this is a big one, they argue passion. Well, it often fades, especially when it becomes your job.
When it turns into an obligation instead of a choice.
Exactly. Suddenly it's work you have to do. And if you keep jumping to the next passion when the old one cools off, you're always starting from square one.
Right, you never get really, really good at one thing.
And getting really good, mastering something is what the source says leads to wealth. You can't do that if you're constantly restarting.
That's a slightly depressing thought, but I see the logic. Mastery takes time and consistency.
And the third point is kind of sharp. They say following your passion is, well, it's self-centered.
Focused on you.
Right. But getting rich, in their view, is about what the market wants, what other people will pay for, not just what you feel like doing.
Okay, hold on. So forget personal fulfillment, just chase the money. That sounds kind of bleak.
Well, they give this example, like, say you're passionate about making paper airplanes. Great hobby, maybe,
Yeah.
but is the market big enough to make you rich? Probably not.
So market demand trumps personal passion if wealth is the main goal.
That's the argument. It's about aligning with what people value, not just what you enjoy. And they add, honestly, most people don't even have one clear passion to follow anyway, so the advice isn't even useful for many.
Okay. So if follow your passion is out, according to this source,
Mhm.
what's the alternative? What should you follow?
They suggest following your effort. They mention Mark Cuban talks about
Now,
this.
follow your effort. How does
Yeah.
that work? What do you actually do?
It means shifting focus from your feelings to your actions. Just look closely at where you spend your free time, willingly. Where does your energy naturally go when you don't have to do something?
Because time is.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the one thing you can't get more of.
exactly. It's your most valuable asset, totally finite. So where you choose to invest it, that's a real factual clue about what you genuinely care about and are willing to sit with.
So it's like finding your interest by looking at your behavior, not trying to feel some big emotion. More practical.
Much more practical, based on observable facts, not unreliable feelings.
Okay, makes sense. Let's move to the second step in this anti-guru plan.
All right. Step 2 takes on manifesting success.
Ah, yes. The idea that you can just think your way to riches, visualize it, and it'll happen. Why are they against that?
Well, the source is pretty blunt here. They claim it's pushed by fake gurus because it sells something very profitable. False hope.
False hope.
Yeah, the promise of results without the hard work. Just think positive, send out vibes, that sort of thing.
And if it doesn't work, which, let's be honest,
Then the source says, these gurus often blame the customer. You didn't believe hard enough, or you didn't manifest correctly. It shifts the blame.
right, avoids any accountability for the method itself. It sounds a bit like scam territory, the way they describe it.
That's exactly the comparison they make. But what about those stories you hear? Like, didn't Jim Carrey write himself a huge check before he made it big?
Yeah, I've heard that one. Wrote himself a $10 million check, then got paid that for Dumb and Dumber.
Hmm.
Seems like proof, right?
The source uses that exact story to talk about survivor bias.
Survivor bias.
Yeah. They argue, sure, Carey wrote the check, but it was probably, quote, far more likely due to the hundreds of other things Jim Carrey was doing.
Like actually working.
Yeah.
Auditioning, writing, performing.
Exactly. Honing his craft, dealing with rejection, hustling. The check was maybe a tiny part, if anything. We hear the one story where it kind of lined up.
But we don't hear about the thousands who wrote checks and nothing happened.
Precisely. It creates a false expectation that just thinking or wishing is the key, ignoring all the action required.
Okay, so if wishing isn't the answer, what is the source's alternative for achieving goals? How do you build that belief?
Simple, they say. Instead of manifesting, develop grit.
Grit, like toughness, perseverance.
Exactly that. Put your head down, take action consistently, and crucially, when you hit setbacks, which you will see them as chances to learn, not reasons to quit.
Stay focused on the long game.
Yep, that builds real resilience. And the source argues that's where true confidence comes from.
Not from just telling yourself you're confident.
No, from actually doing the work, pushing through challenges, and seeing results, even small ones, from your own effort. That self-belief earned through action is way more solid than just reciting affirmations.
Okay, earned confidence versus wished-for confidence. That makes sense. This theme of action over passivity is strong. What's step 3?
Step 3 challenges the idea that you should slow down.
Wait, slow down. Don't people say slow and steady wins the race? Isn't being careful important?
This source says, nope, not if you want to get rich quickly. They argue that moving fast with urgency leads to solving problems faster and grabbing opportunities.
So speed is key. But isn't that just being impatient?
They make a distinction there. It's not about impatience for results. It's about having a sense of urgency in your actions.
Why the urgency?
Because, as they put it kind of bluntly, we're only getting older and your brain is only getting slower. Time's ticking. There's no time to just sit around.
Ouch. But, okay, the clock is always running.
Right. And those small actions you take quickly, every day, they add up, they compound. They really dislike phrases like, if you build it, they will come.
Why is that? Seems hopeful.
Because it suggests passive waiting works. The source says the world doesn't wait for you. Opportunities pass. Waiting means you might miss your shot.
So, act fast, but don't expect overnight success. Is that it?
That's the idea. Move swiftly with what you need to do, but have patience for the results to actually show up. Don't let people tell you to wait or take it easy if action is needed now.
Move fast, be patient. Got it.
Okay.
Step 4.
Step 4 gets into questioning the advice to always follow the rule.
Ooh, okay. Rebel territory.
A little bit. The source actually shares a personal story here about being called highly disruptive back in school.
And that turned out to be good.
Apparently, yes. The core idea is if you do everything exactly like everyone else, follow every single rule to the letter.
You get the same results as everyone else, probably average results.
Exactly. To stand out, to achieve something exceptional like getting rich, you often need to think differently, act differently, and sometimes that means bending or even breaking some rules.
Is there an analogy here?
Yeah, they use the idea of fishing. Don't fish where everyone else is crowded together. Find your own hidden lake.
Go where the competition isn't, even if it's unconventional. Do they give an example?
They do, from their own business, opening their first shop.
And how are they disruptive there?
Well, their big marketing push was printing hundreds of signs and using cable ties to stick them up all over the neighborhood in the middle of the night.
Whoa, okay, that's definitely guerrilla tactics.
Yep.
And probably against some rules.
Oh, for sure. They admit the authorities eventually made them take the signs down. But by then it had worked. It created buzz, got people talking, drove traffic to the shop, word of mouth took over. The temporary rule bending gave them a vital kickstart.
I see the point about needing an edge. But that sounds risky too. Getting fined, maybe? Or just looking bad?
Yeah, that's a really important point. The source doesn't really dig into where that line is, between smart disruption and just causing problems or doing something illegal.
Right.
Their focus is more on the boldness, challenging the norm to get ahead. It's framed as finding an advantage, not necessarily like advocating crime or anything. Think challenging norms, not necessarily breaking major laws.
Okay, strategic nonconformity, maybe. Not just chaos. All right, we've got effort over passion, grit over manifestation, speed over slowing down, and disruption over rules. What's the 5th and final step?
The last one tackles another piece of conventional wisdom. The idea that you should Always learn to compromise.
Compromise. But isn't compromise essential for deals, for teamwork, for just getting along? It's usually seen as a good thing, right? Finding the middle ground.
The source sees it very differently. They define compromise not as finding the best solution together, but often as settling for something. Well, something lower than the standards you would expect.
Lower standards. So they see compromise
As basically another word for mediocrity.
wow, okay, that flips it completely. Compromise equals mediocrity. That's strong.
It is, and they know people will push back, saying, well, if you don't compromise, you're just difficult.
Yeah, or stubborn. Egotistical, maybe.
Right, but they draw a line. It's not about refusing to listen because of ego. It's about listening, considering other ideas, but then refusing to water down your core vision or lower your fundamental standards just to make things easier or avoid an argument.
So hear people out, but don't sacrifice your non-negotiables.
That's the essence. They bring in a C.S. Lewis quote here. The safest road to hell is the gradual one.
How does that relate to compromise?
Their interpretation is that compromise often feels like the safe, easy path, small concessions here and there, but each small step away from your high standards, your vision, it gradually leads you further and further down until you end up somewhere you didn't want to be.
Somewhere mediocre. You compromised your way there.
That's the danger they highlight. So yeah, be open to ideas, but stay close to compromises, meaning be wary of them. Don't give in easily when it matters.
And they wrap this point up with a pretty challenging question for the listener, right?
They do. They basically ask you, how do you want to be remembered? As the person who kept compromising on their dreams and goals just to keep the peace or take the easy route?
Yeah.
Or as someone who had a clear vision, stood up for their beliefs and standards, and lived life on their own terms, even if it ruffled some feathers along the way?
Yeah, that really puts it starkly. Okay, so let's try and pull this whole anti-guru formula together. The source is essentially saying, forget passion, follow your effort, build grit through action, not manifestation.
Act with urgency. Don't just slow down and wait. Be willing to be disruptive, break some rules strategically.
And finally, don't compromise on your vision or standards because that leads to mediocrity. That's quite the counter-narrative.
It really is. It suggests that a lot of the advice that feels comfortable or safe might actually be designed, maybe unintentionally, to keep you average. Achieving big things like significant wealth requires a different, maybe less comfortable approach.
This whole dive definitely makes you question some things you might have taken for granted about success. It's asking us to look really critically at the advice we consume.
Absolutely. And it leaves you with that final thought stemming from the C.S. Lewis idea. Maybe that safe road of compromise isn't actually safe for your goals.
Right. It could be the road away from what you truly want to achieve if it means constantly lowering the bar. So the question for you listening is, where might you be taking that gradual road? Where are compromises potentially steering you towards mediocrity? And what could standing firm unlock? Something to think about.